My name is Arisha. And no, this is not a love story. This is a revenge narration. Slow. Cold. Calculated. The kind that doesn't scream. Because it doesn't need to. People think betrayal comes with noise. Arguments. Tears. Drama. They're wrong. Real betrayal happens quietly. With smiles. With family dinners. With signatures taken under the name of trust. I saw it happen. I was standing there, silent. Watching a family destroy one of their own. Without raising their voice even once. His name was Ayan. A man too honest for his own blood. Too loyal for people who only loved themselves. That day, papers were placed on the table. Property papers. Legal documents. The kind that decide who eats. And who ends up on the street. His brother smiled. His uncle quoted morals. His mother stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is forced, not chosen. Ayan signed. Not because he was weak. But because he trusted them. And trust is the easiest thing to kill. By nightfall, the house felt colder. By morning, Ayan was no longer part of it. No room. No money. No explanation. Just a sentence that still echoes in my head. You're no longer needed here. I watched him walk out with nothing but his pride. His shoulders straight. His eyes broken. That was the moment I stopped being just a witness. I didn't chase him dramatically. I didn't cry. I walked up to him calmly and said, "This isn't your end. This is the moment they'll regret." He looked at me like a man who had lost everything. And didn't know what to save first. That night, he sat on a bench under a broken streetlight. A man abandoned by his own blood. And I sat across from him. Knowing something he didn't yet understand. People who betray you don't realize. They're creating their own enemy. I didn't promise revenge. I don't believe in emotional promises. I promised patience. Because revenge doesn't rush. Revenge watches. Learns. Waits. I knew his brother's weakness. Greed disguised as confidence. I knew his uncle's weakness. Ego wrapped in fake respect. They thought they had won. That was their first mistake. I had my own past. My own stolen inheritance. My own lessons carved by betrayal. And I knew one truth better than anyone. You don't destroy your enemies with anger. You destroy them by letting them believe. They're untouchable. That night, Ayan asked me one question. "Why are you helping me?" I answered without hesitation. Because I've seen how this ends. And because when men like them fall, they fall hard. He didn't smile. But something changed in his eyes. Not hope. Focus. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about saving him anymore. This was about building something dangerous. They thought they erased him. But they forgot one thing. I was watching. I was remembering. And I was planning. My name is Arisha. And this was only the beginning. People think the hardest part of betrayal is losing everything. It isn't. The hardest part is waking up the next morning. And realizing the world didn't stop for your pain. Ayan learned that fast. Days passed. He stopped asking why. He stopped explaining himself. He became quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The dangerous one. We didn't talk about revenge at first. Revenge spoken too early becomes emotional. And emotions make mistakes. Instead, we talked about survival. I watched him rebuild himself in silence. Early mornings. Late nights. Jobs he never thought he'd do. He never complained. That's when I knew. He wasn't broken. He was reprogramming himself. One evening, he finally asked, "What would you do if the people who ruined you were sitting across from you right now?" I answered slowly, carefully. I wouldn't say a word. I'd listen. Because people reveal their weaknesses when they think they're safe. That night, I told him my story. Not to gain sympathy, but to show him the map. My father trusted his brothers. They trusted his silence. They took his business piece by piece, until there was nothing left to fight for. I didn't scream. I studied contracts, patterns, human behavior. And one thing became clear. Greed makes people predictable. I told Ion. Your brother will destroy himself, trying to prove he's smarter than you. Your uncle will collapse, trying to protect his reputation. He listened. Not with anger. With precision. That's when the rules were set. Rule 1. Never confront too early. Rule 2. Never let them see growth. Rule 3. Let them underestimate you. Ion followed every rule. While they celebrated their victory, we built strategy. I learned their businesses, their loans, their habits. I knew which banks they trusted, which investors they lied to, which mistakes they repeated. Ion asked once, what if they realize we're planning something? I smiled. They won't. Because they don't believe you're capable of it. And that belief was our weapon. Months passed. They saw Ion working small jobs, struggling. They laughed. They felt powerful. They felt untouchable. That's when I knew it was working. Because the moment your enemy laughs at you, they stop watching you. I helped Ion rebuild his confidence quietly. No motivational speeches. No dramatic promises. Just facts. I said. They didn't defeat you because you were weak. They defeated you because you were kind. Now you'll be kind again. But never blind. One night, Ion looked at me and said, they took my home. I answered, we'll take their peace. He didn't ask how. He trusted the process. And trust, used correctly, can become power. By the end of that year, Ion was no longer the man they threw out. He was becoming something else. Controlled. Focused. Unrecognizable. They still thought he was nothing. They were wrong. I didn't fall in love with him. I believed in him. And belief, when combined with patience, creates monsters your enemies never see coming. They thought the story was over. But stories don't end when the victim survives. They end when the villains realize they were never in control. And that realization was getting closer. Revenge doesn't begin with action. It begins with information. By the time Ion stopped looking like a man who had lost everything, I already knew more about his enemies than they knew about themselves. They were comfortable. And comfort makes people careless. His brother, Rashid, lived like a winner. New car. Loud confidence. Risky decisions masked his bravery. His uncle, Cameron, hid behind respectability. Mosque visits. Family lectures. A reputation built on fear, not honor. They believed the story they told the world. Ion was finished. So they talked freely. They borrowed recklessly. They trusted the wrong people. And I listened. I taught Ion how to observe without reacting. How to sit in a room and become invisible. How to let people explain themselves without realizing they're confessing. Never interrupt, I told him. When people talk too much, they reveal where it hurts. We learned their structure, their income streams, their debts hidden behind fake success. Every business has a crack. Every man has a weakness. Rashid's weakness was ego. He wanted admiration more than stability. Cameron's weakness was fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing respect. We didn't attack either. We waited. I introduced Ion to circles where no one remembered his past. New names. New connections. He spoke less. Observed more. And slowly, very slowly, doors began to open. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Just opportunity after opportunity. Placed exactly where they needed to be. I watched Ion grow into the role. Not with arrogance. With discipline. One night, he asked, "Are we becoming like them?" I answered honestly. No. They destroyed for pleasure. We're rebuilding for balance. There's a difference. By then, we had enough leverage. Not to strike. But to prepare the fall. We invested indirectly. Small amounts. Silent positions. We didn't want control. We wanted access. Cameron signed documents. He didn't fully read. Rashid made promises he couldn't keep. They trusted money more than loyalty. Another mistake. I remember the first sign of collapse. A delayed payment. A nervous phone call. A meeting cancelled without explanation. Ion noticed it too. He looked at me and said, "They're shaking." I corrected him. "No. They're pretending not to. That's always worse." I made sure nothing pointed back to us. No emotional involvement. No personal connections. Revenge traced back becomes chaos. Revenge executed cleanly becomes justice. Ion's confidence was no longer loud. It was quiet. Centered. He no longer wanted to confront them. He wanted to outgrow them. And that scared me. Because growth is the most irreversible form of revenge. They still laughed at him. Still mocked his fall. They didn't realize. The ground beneath them was cracking. I told Ion one final thing before the next phase. When they start blaming each other, we step forward. Not as enemies. As solutions. He nodded. No excitement. No rage. Just readiness. That's when I knew. The boy they betrayed was gone. In his place stood a man they wouldn't recognize. Until it was too late. And I was no longer planning revenge. I was orchestrating consequences. The collapse didn't begin loudly. No police. No shouting. No public humiliation. Just silence. The kind that creeps in slowly. And makes powerful men nervous. Rashid was the first to feel it. A missed payment turned into two. A confident meeting turned into excuses. He laughed it off at first. Said business had ups and downs. But his eyes told a different story. Cameron sensed it too. He began asking questions. Demanding reports. Calling meetings at odd hours. When men who love control start losing it, they become cruel. And cruelty always leaves evidence. We didn't interfere. We watched. I told Ion. Never push someone who's already falling. Step back and let gravity do the work. They started blaming each other. Rashid accused Cameron of bad decisions. Cameron accused Rashid of recklessness. The unity that betrayed Ion was now eating itself alive. That's when we stepped closer. Not as revenge seekers. As solutions. Ion entered the picture. Through a third party. Clean. Professional. Unemotional. A struggling investor with patience. They didn't recognize him at first. How could they? To them, he was a memory they erased. Cameron shook his hand without hesitation. Rashid smiled without guilt. I watched from a distance. As they welcomed the man they once threw out. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. Just focus. The first deal was small. Strategic. A loan restructuring. A shared risk. They agreed quickly. Desperation makes people generous. Ayan's name appeared on documents. They barely read. Another mistake. Cameron began to rely on him. Asked for advice. Shared confidential concerns. He trusted Ayan. Because he didn't recognize him as a threat. That's the beauty of patience. Rashid, however, grew insecure. He felt something shifting. Power slipping. Men like him don't fear loss. They fear replacement. And that fear made him reckless. He took shortcuts. Cut corners. Ignored warnings. Every wrong decision. Tightened the trap. One evening, Ayan asked me, "When do we stop?" I looked at him and said, "When they can no longer hurt anyone else." This wasn't about punishment. It was about containment. The final blow came quietly. An audit request. A delayed approval. A contract reviewed too late. Everything they ignored. Returned at once. Banks pulled back. Investors questioned loyalty. Partners disappeared. Rashid panicked. Cameron denied. And in the middle of their chaos stood Ayan. Calm, composed, prepared. They turned to him for help. That was the moment. Not to strike. Not to expose. But to step away. Ayan withdrew support legally. Cleanly. Without emotion. The structure collapsed. Not because we attacked. But because we stopped holding it together. That night, Ayan didn't celebrate. He sat quietly. I asked him what he felt. He said, "I don't hate them anymore." And that's when I knew. The revenge was complete. Because hatred binds you to your enemy. Indifference sets you free. They lost everything they stole. And more importantly, they lost control. The house they took from Ayan was listed for auction. And for the first time, they never saw me coming. Not directly. Not personally. For months, I had been a shadow. Silent, calculating, invisible. They thought I was just a bystander. A spectator. A girl with a soft heart. Watching their chaos from afar. How wrong they were. The first time Rashid realized I wasn't just a witness was when he lost his most secure investor. A deal he considered untouchable. Collapsed overnight. He called me once. In his arrogance, he thought I would comfort him. He said, "Why are things falling apart? This isn't supposed to happen." I smiled. Quietly. And answered in a single sentence. "You should have paid attention before." Silence on the other end. I knew then he had understood. But not fully. Cameron was slower. He still didn't want to believe that a girl, someone he underestimated, could be the mind behind the storm. He had always relied on appearances. A calm face, polite manners, measured words. But appearances can be deceiving. And I had learned that early in my life. Ayan watched it unfold. I taught him to step back. To let them make mistakes. To watch as their pride betrayed them. They argued openly now. Rashid blamed Cameron. Cameron blamed Rashid. Their alliance, once the weapon that destroyed Ayan, was now eating them alive. And that's when I stepped in. Not with force. Not with anger. I was calm. Professional. I made myself visible only in small doses. A meeting, a signature, a recommendation. They finally saw me. And they underestimated me. They thought I was still a girl with sympathy for their family. A young woman who believed in loyalty. They were wrong. I was the architect. I was the strategist. I was the storm they never anticipated. One by one, their allies turned away. Investors pulled out. Banks questioned credibility. Partnerships dissolved. Rashid screamed into his phone one night. I don't understand. Everything is collapsing. I didn't answer. I only smiled. He didn't know that I was the quiet voice that had been preparing Ion. That had mapped every move. That had planted every domino. Cameron, meanwhile, became paranoid. Every phone call, every email, every meeting was suspect. He had no idea that the girl he dismissed was the reason his empire crumbled silently, like sand slipping through his fingers. And Ion? He finally looked at me and asked quietly, "Are we done yet?" I looked at him. Not with joy. Not with rage. With patience. With focus. With the calm that only comes from watching justice unfold exactly as planned. "Almost," I said. "Just one step remains." The last step wasn't destruction. It wasn't exposure. It wasn't chaos. It was recognition. They had to see who caused their fall. Not with threats. Not with screams. But with undeniable presence. The man they thought weak now stood tall. Ion, confident, composed. And the girl they never noticed, Arisha, smiled silently. They had thought they erased him. They had thought they erased me. And in reality, we had been writing their end. All along. This was the moment they realized. The quiet ones are the most dangerous. Because we don't react. We observe. We wait. And when the time comes, we act with precision. No one can survive a storm they didn't even see forming. And they had been blind. They had ignored me. They had underestimated the quiet girl. And that mistake was irreversible. They say revenge tastes bitter. They're wrong. Revenge, true, calculated revenge, tastes like justice. Clean. Sharp. Precise. And when it's delivered without haste, it leaves a silence so loud it echoes forever. Rashid and Cameron were finished. Not in a courtroom drama. Not in a screaming argument. Not even with threats. No, their empire fell quietly. Piece by piece. They argued. They panicked. They doubted themselves. Every decision they made after underestimating us was a nail in their own coffin. And I watched. Arisha, who had been ignored, belittled, and dismissed, stood on the edge of their ruin. Ion didn't need to raise a hand. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to fight. All he did was exist. Confident. Calm. Untouchable. And because of that, they fell. I remember the night we walked into the old house. The house that once belonged to Ion. The house his family stole from him. We walked through the empty rooms. Dust floating in sunlight. Memories carved into the walls. Ion looked at me. "Is this really over?" he asked softly. I smiled. Not a smile of triumph. A smile of closure. "I think the only thing left," I said, "is to give them a lesson they'll never forget." The next morning, everything was finalized. The house was back in his name. Every financial account, every legal paper, every stolen asset was corrected. The people who had destroyed him, my enemy, his enemy, were left with nothing but fear and regret. And in that fear, I saw the look I had been waiting for. Recognition. They finally understood. Not with words. Not with apologies. Not with excuses. With silence. That's the thing about revenge, I taught Ion this. Hatred can bind you to your enemy forever. But justice frees you. And freedom is far more powerful than anger. I didn't smile at their suffering. I smiled at the lesson. I smiled at the truth. I smiled at the fact that patience, planning, and focus could outperform brutality and deceit. Ion turned to me. "Thank you," he said quietly. Not with tears. Not with drama. Just honesty. I shook my head. Don't thank me. You did this by surviving. You did this by learning. I only guided the storm. For a moment, we stood in silence, watching the sun fall through the shattered windows, casting golden lines across the floor. And then I spoke the words I had been waiting to say since the very beginning. I am Arisha. I am the quiet one. The one you ignored. The one you dismissed. And now, the one who cannot be erased. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. The people who destroyed lives. They had learned their lesson. And the people who deserved to rise. We had risen. I looked at Ayan, my partner in this silent war, and said, let's go home. Not because we were victorious. Not because we wanted to celebrate. But because we had earned the right to move forward. And as we left, I realized the classic truth of life and revenge. Those who underestimate the quiet ones are always the first to fall. And those who survive the storm don't just rebuild their world. They reshape it forever. I am Arisha. And this is my story. The reckoning is over. But the memory will echo forever.